What if feeling everything more deeply isn't a flaw, but a measurable feature of how some nervous systems are built? Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski identified what he called psychic overexcitabilities in the 1960s, heightened responses to ordinary stimuli that aren't disorders. They're stable, measurable differences in how a nervous system processes the world. Emotional intensity, in Dabrowski's framework, means feelings arrive faster, hit harder, and linger longer than average. It isn't mood instability. It isn't immaturity. It's a sensitivity dial calibrated permanently higher than most people's. Research by psychologist Elaine Aron, published in 1996, estimated that roughly 20% of the population qualifies as highly sensitive, meaning 1 in 5 people around you is processing sensory and emotional input at a fundamentally deeper level. Aron's 2010 neuroimaging study, published in Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience, showed that highly sensitive people display greater activation in brain regions tied to awareness and empathy, the insula and mirror neuron systems, when viewing emotional images compared to less sensitive individuals. Aron found this sensitivity trait in over 100 species, from fruit flies to chimpanzees. It's not a human quirk. It's an ancient evolutionary strategy, a biological bet that some individuals should notice more, feel more, and respond more. But here's where it gets harder. The environments that shaped this trait, small, slow, information scarce, no longer exist. Today's emotionally intense person is running ancient high-gain hardware in a world that generates noise at industrial scale. Neuroscientist Jadzia Jejelowicz's 2011 fMRI study confirmed that highly sensitive brains spend more time in perceptual processing, running longer, deeper cognitive loops on the same input. That depth is real. Because the world calibrates to the majority, emotionally intense people are routinely misread. Their depth registers as drama. Their grief registers as overreaction. Their joy registers as excess. The trait becomes socially illegible. And that illegibility is its own quiet erosion. Researcher Brené Brown's qualitative work on shame, published across studies from 2006 to 2012, documents how repeated messages of too much and too sensitive don't just sting. They restructure how a person understands their own emotional life from the inside. Here's the counterintuitive part. Suppressing emotional intensity doesn't reduce it. A 2011 study by James Gross at Stanford showed that emotional suppression increases physiological arousal. The feeling goes underground, but the body keeps the score. Emotionally intense people experience relationships at higher resolution. A slight shift in someone's tone, a brief pause before a reply, these register as full signals. That attunement builds deep connection. It also makes ordinary friction feel seismic. But something unexpected lives inside this tension. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's research on creative individuals, published in 1996, found that people who reported the most emotional pain also reported the highest creative output. The same depth cuts in both directions. The mechanism isn't romantic. It's neurological. Emotional intensity increases dopaminergic sensitivity, meaning the reward signal from a new idea, a solved problem, or a finished piece of work arrives louder. The creative drive and the emotional sensitivity share the same wiring. Emotional intensity also produces what researchers call empathic accuracy, the ability to correctly read another person's emotional state. A 2009 study by William Ickes found that highly sensitive individuals scored significantly higher on empathic accuracy tasks, with effect sizes in the medium to large range. That precision isn't universal. It's a documented, partly heritable capacity, and it sharpens with practice. Dabrowski himself argued that emotional overexcitability wasn't pathology, it was the raw material of ethical development. People who feel injustice more acutely are more likely to act against it. Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose own letters document an almost overwhelming emotional response to witnessing slavery, channeled that intensity into Uncle Tom's Cabin, a work Abraham Lincoln credited with helping ignite the abolitionist movement. The trait isn't just personal, it has a social function. But the science doesn't let us romanticize this cleanly. A 2012 meta-analysis by Lionel Floor Henry and colleagues documented that high sensory processing sensitivity is a significant predictor of anxiety and depression outcomes, not because something is broken, but because a high-gain system in a high-noise world accumulates damage faster than most. This is the distinction researchers draw. Emotional intensity is a trait, but emotional dysregulation is a skill deficit. Intensity is the volume of the signal. Dysregulation is the inability to work with that signal. One is fixed, the other is learnable. Marshall Linehan developed dialectical behavior therapy in the 1980s, specifically for people with extreme emotional sensitivity. Its core premise: emotions aren't enemies to be silenced, they're information to be decoded. The goal is fluency, not suppression. Something specific happens when a person first encounters the language of emotional intensity applied to themselves. Psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett's research on emotional granularity shows that naming an experience with precision reduces its physiological grip on the body. Aaron's research is explicit. Sensitivity isn't destiny. Highly sensitive individuals in supportive, low-hostility environments show outcomes equivalent to or better than non-sensitive peers. The trait isn't the problem. The mismatch between trait and environment is. Research on attachment by Sue Johnson, whose emotionally focused therapy model has been validated in over 30 clinical trials, shows that emotionally intense people don't need partners who feel less. They need partners who can stay present when the feeling gets large. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant's research on pro-social motivation found that high-empathy individuals are among the most effective contributors in collaborative environments, but also the most prone to compassion fatigue when that contribution goes unrecognized. Intensity needs reciprocity. For emotionally intense people, unstructured time isn't laziness, it's recovery. Neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Yang's 2012 research showed that the default mode network, active during quiet, inward rest, is essential for integrating complex emotional experience into coherent self-understanding. Consider this. A piece of music ends, and most people feel it fade. An emotionally intense person may sit in silence afterward, unable to speak, still inside the feeling, not because something is wrong, but because their nervous system is still processing what just happened. That lingering isn't weakness. Evolution didn't wire some nervous systems for depth by accident. It was a tested survival strategy, refined across hundreds of species over millions of years. The person still sitting in that concert hall is doing exactly what their nervous system was shaped to do. The world moved on. They stayed with the signal. The exhaustion that emotionally intense people carry is real, but it isn't proof of fragility. It's the metabolic cost of running a more complex perceptual system. The same system that makes them better at reading rooms, building trust, and creating work that moves other people. If 20% of people are wired this way, that's not a niche concern. That's a design requirement. Schools, workplaces, and healthcare systems built entirely around the non-sensitive majority are quietly failing 1 in 5 people. Not because those people are broken, but because the system never accounted for them. The language we use shapes the experience. Telling someone they're too sensitive frames the trait as excess. Telling someone their nervous system processes depth frames the same trait as architecture. Same person, same wiring, completely different relationship to their own inner life. Here's something the research adds that rarely gets cited. Aaron's longitudinal work found that highly sensitive adults who had received accurate psychoeducation about their trait, who had been told, in plain terms, what their nervous system actually is, reported significantly lower rates of anxiety and higher life satisfaction than equally sensitive adults who had not. Understanding the trait doesn't just feel better, it measurably changes outcomes. So here's the practical implication. If you recognize this trait in yourself, the most evidence-backed move isn't to feel less. It's to do 2 specific things. Audit your environment for chronic overstimulation, and learn the affect labeling practice at the core of DBT, which Barrett's research confirms reduces the physiological intensity of the emotion itself. Name it precisely. Reduce the noise around it. That's not self-indulgence. That's working with the system you actually have. We opened by asking whether feeling everything more deeply is a flaw or a feature. The research gives a clear answer. It's a feature, ancient, measurable, and distributed across 1 in 5 people on this planet. The question was never whether it's real. It always was.